Okay, so I've been noticing a lot of comments lately on my videos of people saying that they're dealing with anxiety and depression, and I've kind of put off making video specifically on this because I just feel like I'm not an expert when it comes to this stuff. But there's been so many comments and so many people talking about this that I felt like I really should tell you guys about my story dealing with anxiety and depression and how I got out of it. Because, you know, a lot of people just look at other people as maybe their lives are going really great, maybe they've had a clean slate, never dealt with the same problems that they have, but I'm here to tell you that I myself have experienced a long phase of really terrible anxiety and depression, and I wanted to make a video in hopes of helping anybody that I can out there who struggled with the same thing. But this is the story of how I had heart surgery. Now, this happened around 5 years ago, back in like 2011-ish, maybe 6 years ago, I can't remember. It was around 2011, 2012, when I was experiencing a lot of anxieties. Now, me being an 11-year-old, or actually, if this was 5 years ago, so I was around 11 years old at this time where the story takes place, and I had been experiencing a lot of anxieties. So I was scared of all these irrational things, fears that I created in my head. I was scared of staying inside by myself, of being home alone, even going upstairs when nobody else was up there. I had created all these fears in my head for no reason other than I was just a kid struggling with these problems, but it started getting to a point where it was kind of not normal. I was struggling with so many fears. Everything you could think of, I was scared of it. It really started getting bad when I started worrying about getting diseases and getting life-threatening problems. And I would always create these things in my head of, you know, what would happen if I got this? What would happen if I got that? And I started really worrying about getting all of these problems. This was when I started going to a counselor, and I went to my counselor mainly to talk about my issues and to rationalize my fears and to talk about why I was struggling with these things and maybe some ways that I could that could help me to deal with these anxieties. Finally, after a while of going to the counselor, feeling a little bit better and not struggling as much with these fears, but they were still in the back of my head. So one day I was hanging around with my friends. I was always a really happy, crazy person who loved to run around and mess around outside and just a normal, happy kid during the day. Of course, at night I was always scared of things. One day when I was running around outside, I had this punch in the gut feeling, and I lost my breath, and then my heart started pounding really, really quickly. And of course, since I was previously struggling with being afraid of getting a disease or dying of a, you know, life-threatening disorder, I was instantly completely freaked out. I had no idea what was going on. My heart was beating so quickly. It felt like my heart was beating out of my chest randomly. It just turned on like a button, and I felt like I was gonna faint. So I remember going inside and telling my dad and told him to feel my chest. I remember my dad being a little bit concerned because of how fast my heart was beating. And of course, that just made me even more freaked out. He called the doctor to tell them what was going on and the symptoms and what I was feeling and all this kind of stuff, and I was crying and really afraid. It brought back all the previous anxieties of me worrying. So a week passes, and I remember going to the doctor, and I was really scared because no kid likes the doctor. I mean, come on. So I was really scared. remember getting all these tests, EKGs and whatnot. The doctor came into the room when my mom and me were waiting and said everything looked fine, and that what it seemed like to him was that I was dealing with anxieties, because sometimes when you're anxious it can cause your heart to beat quickly, and so that's the thing that they diagnosed it as, was me just having anxiety. I started going to my counselor again and talking to him about my fears and why I was so afraid. So at this point I started kind of fearing if that thing was going to happen to me again, but I wasn't worried about it. I guess I kind of thought it was just going to be a one-time thing, and I started getting better again. And then a couple weeks passes and I had this happen to me again, and this time it was a little bit more fast, and it was that same punch in the gut feeling. Heart starts beating quickly, and I'd say the actual thing that was happening to me would last for maybe about 1 minute to 2 minutes of my heart beating so fast to where I felt like I was gonna pass out. And of course, in my mind, I thought I was having a heart attack. I never knew when this was gonna happen. So as the weeks went by, it would start happening sooner and sooner, but I never knew when it was gonna happen. So this caused me to go into a really, really dark state of depression. Of course, every time my parents called the doctor and I went into the doctor, they would still say that it was just anxiety because they didn't know what it was, and every time they would look at my heart, they thought it looked really, really normal. I remember this one time, these college students came in to look at my heart because of how normal it looked, so there was nothing wrong with my heart, and in their eyes it was anxiety. And I remember just feeling so alone at this point because I knew that there was something wrong with me. When this happened, it was not a normal feeling. I knew that there was something wrong with me, but they weren't able to diagnose a problem. They weren't able to figure it out. So I felt like I had this mysterious issue that nobody else knew about, and that I was gonna die from it at any moment because I didn't know what it was. My parents didn't know what it was. Nobody around me seemed to have the same problem. So the more and more and more the doctors just told me it was anxiety, I stopped wanting to talk about it because nobody understood me, and I felt all alone and depressed and kind of hopeless, because when there's not a solution to a problem, you start to feel like there's no solution and that you're going to be stuck with this forever or to a certain point. So, of course, I kept going to my counselor and talking to him about my fears and why I was so afraid of this. These incidences started lasting longer. My heart would start beating quickly, even quicker than the last time I'd had it, and it would last longer, and I wouldn't know when it was going to stop. And I thought I was having a heart attack every time it happened. So, feeling like you're going to die multiple times and not knowing a solution is a terrible feeling. And instead of being happy like I used to be, I was so worried about having this happen to me. I was always in a state of sadness and fear and depression, and my parents noticed and everybody noticed, but there was nothing that they could do about it because the doctors didn't know what was going on. I remember I went to church camp and we were having a great time at church, and I was drinking a lot of energy drinks and having a lot of fun with my friends, and of course there was a creek, so that's where everybody wanted to go swimming. It had been a while since I had this heart issue that I was dealing with, so I had gotten a little bit happier. I was still a little bit fearful, but I kind of forgot a little bit about it because it hadn't happened in a really long time. So I was at church camp, and around the last day, everybody was going down to the creek, and so I decided I was going to go down also. And there was this big, huge rock that people were jumping off of into the water. And I decided I was going to jump off the rock, so I got up there and I jumped into the water from really high up. It was maybe around 40 feet. And instantly I remember my heart feeling a little bit awkward, like something wasn't quite right. So I got out of the water and I instantly laid down. It wasn't doing the same feeling of my heart beating really quickly, but it felt was about to happen at any moment. My friend remembers saying that I looked really pale at the time, and so he took me to the nurse's office, and I was sitting there, and she was counting my pulse, and she said everything looked normal, but I insisted that something was wrong. So she said, "Here, take this water," and I remember taking a sip of water, drinking it, and then instantly, my heart was beating the fastest it's ever been. I think my heart was probably going at 215 beats a minute, and to put that into perspective, the normal heart rate is around 70 to 80 beats per minute. That's how fast my heart was beating. It was so frightening, and I remember crying and saying, "This is the fastest my heart's ever been beating. You need to call the ambulance. I feel like I'm gonna die." And I remember this went on for around 30 minutes. But I'll tell you, that felt like a lifetime, because my brother from the camp came into the room, and he didn't know what was going on either. Nobody knew what this was, so I just thought I was about to die. I remember feeling like I was gonna pass out at any moment. My heart was beating so quickly. I was looking up and everything looked like fizzy, and so she called the ambulance, and I got in the ambulance and went to the hospital. And eventually my heart slowed down. I can't really know the exact moment it stopped beating really quickly, but I just remember eventually it stopped, and I was in the hospital room feeling lonelier than ever. I was away from the camp, and everybody knew what had happened to me, but nobody knew the cause of it. So the ambulance, they took all these blood tests, and they did all these tests on my heart, and this was maybe 4 hours from where I live originally, so I was all alone in the hospital without my parents, with just a team leader from the camp, and I just remember feeling so alone and so depressed and anxious, and I felt like I was gonna die. And I remember sitting there in the hospital room, and I didn't have any other option than to just pray that I would be okay. So I prayed to God, and I was like, "God, I feel so lonely right now. I don't know what's going on. I really hope that you can be with me right now, because I feel really lonely, and I feel like I have no other option but to just be sad all the time. And I don't know what religion any of you believe in, and I'm not trying to force any religion on you, but I'm just saying, I just remember feeling so lonely and just praying, because that's the only thing I felt like I had left to do. And instantly I felt so much better. But I took a nap after that, and I was still really scared about it. Of course, you don't just snap and instantly become okay, but I remember feeling better. That didn't solve everything right away. I was still really scared, and I was hoping something was going to happen, so I went to the doctor. I started going to a heart doctor, and he was the first person to be able to tell me kind of what this was. He said it might be SVT, which is supraventricular tachycardia, which is an electrical circuit in the brain in the heart that sometimes shorts out and causes your heart to beat really quickly. And he said he wasn't sure that that's what it was, but the only way that they could do anything about it was if they caught it, which is where I want to say my first point. If any of you struggling with anxiety, is that the best thing that you can do is talk to somebody, because any time that I did talk to somebody, I felt better about myself. But for some reason, I decided not to. More and more I decided not to, and it made me feel worse and worse. Eventually, a couple weeks passed. I wasn't having this heart symptom for a while. And then one day I was helping my friend clean my room, and I was stepping over something, and bam, my heart goes into that thing again, and it's even worse than it's ever been before. And at this point I thought I was gonna die, because my heart was racing so quickly. And the doctor doctors had to carry me from upstairs all the way down into the ambulance because they called the ambulance again. But when I got to the hospital, they had to give me some sort of medicine that would stop my heart because of how fast it was beating, because it was starting to get dangerous, and that helped my heart slow down. And I remember the doctor coming into the room and being like, "We got it. We recorded everything." And I was so relieved after that point forward. And a week later I went to the doctor and he said he was able to say it was SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, and that so many people have had this case. And that's why sometimes we feel like we're alone in these things. Sometimes we feel like we're the only people dealing with these problems that we're facing. I felt like I was alone. I felt like I was the only person in the world that had ever dealt with this, but when it finally became clear to me that many people had dealt with this same issue, and if I maybe would have just talked about it more, maybe people would have come out and said that they had this before. And so I just stress really that y'all find somebody that you can talk to about your anxiety, because talking to somebody is the best thing you can do. Talk to somebody, tell them about how you're feeling, because I guarantee you somebody has dealt with the same thing that you have. I went into the hospital like 4 months later, and I had a procedure on my heart where they sent catheters up my arteries to go into my heart and freeze this or burn the spot that was having a short circuit. And my heart was back to being normal. And I was feeling great for a long time. And then, for some reason, I went into a relapse where I started worrying about something else happening with my heart. And even though this was irrational because they had fixed my heart, I started worrying about it again. And for a month, I went through a really, really bad phase of anxiety. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I shut myself in my room to sleep because at least when I slept, I could be relieved of my anxiety. And it was unhealthy. It was the worst anxiety I had ever dealt with. Even though physically I was okay, in my mind, I felt like something was wrong. The mind is a lot stronger than people think. I didn't get better until I started not letting it control me. I got to a point where I was like, okay, do I want to sit and fester in my anxiety forever? Do I want to sit here and just worry about this issue? Or do I want to try and go out and live my life and enjoy what I can? And I decided I was going to put my anxieties aside and I was going to start living and enjoying life for what it was. And I started to get better, and once I started to enjoy life more and started putting these anxieties away and talking to more people about it, I started slowly getting rid of these anxieties to where now I am completely fine and I don't really struggle with anxieties. Of course I do at points, but here's my thing for you guys. Everybody in the world has struggled with anxiety and depression. You're not alone, and I want you to talk to somebody about it. Get counsel if you have to. And don't try and think about it too much. Allow yourself to enjoy life and to not focus so much on the negative sides of life, but the positive sides of life, because there's a lot to be grateful for. A lot of people always feel like they're in terrible situations, and I realize there's a lot of people that are in not great environments. But one thing I have for you that helped me was look around at every person in the world. All the grown-ups in the world. You're probably still a kid, or maybe you are a grown-up. But look at people from all over. They've all struggled with problems. They've all dealt with things, maybe even worse things than you have in your life. And look at where they are now. They're walking around the world. They're doing fine. So I want you to think that all problems are temporary. And you're going to deal with problems throughout your life, but the best thing you can do is try to overcome them by not thinking about them too much, and maybe by talking about them with somebody and realizing that you're not alone. So yeah, that was my story. I hope that this helped anybody who's dealing with anxiety. It's never too late to get rid of your anxiety, and I know that some people feel like it's hopeless, but it's never hopeless. And I hope that my story can kind of help any of you. That's the main goal. So thank you for watching, and I love you, and I hope that you know that with whatever problem you're struggling with, somebody out there is there to help you. And I hope that this video helped you. I'm gonna peace out now, but I'll see you next time.